Welcome to Spirits Podcast, episode 56, King Arthur with Christian Madera.
You know, Amanda, this is such a, well-loved and, just remains in the canon of human stories so much. So naturally, we're going to shit on it a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's so well known that even I knew a little bit about it. And we have just a completely new take. There is all kinds of crazy stuff. I quote a movie correctly. There's a lot of talk about shipping.
There's some real good hot takes in this.
Very hot, the hottest of takes.
The hottest of takes.
Like the hottest of takes and the roundest of tables. That's what we have to offer you here on Spirits Podcast.
Which is ironic because the hot takes were very hot back in February when we recorded this.
I know. Christian has been so patient. And he's a great friend of ours and the kind of proprietor of the podcast Once and Future Nerd.
Which is definitely worth checking out.
Fantastic. But before we get to that, I would love to thank our newest patrons, R and Megan, for joining us, as well as our supporting producer level patrons. Neil, Chandra, Philip, Julie, Sarah, Josh, Eeyore, Mercedes, Sandra, Robert, Lindsay, Phil, Catherine, Ryan, and Deborah.
Each of you is in an OT3 friendship with Amanda and I.
Oh my gosh, that's adorable. As are our legend level patrons, Leanne, Erin, Ashley, Shannon, Cammie, and Cassie.
You're all the knights of our round table.
Aw, so sweet. And we were drinking this episode, something that I really want to reprise now that it's cold again. We've lasted so long before putting out this recording.
I think Christian actually suggested this recipe.
Yes, he brought some beautiful mead with us, or to us, for the recording. And it was very cold, so we made hot toddies with whiskey and lemon, and it was so good.
You guys had whiskey. I don't drink whiskey.
Yes, so Julia just had mead and more for me.
It was delicious.
We are sponsored this week by Audible. We have talked about it before, but Audible brings you an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more.
And you can get your 30-day free trial at audible.com/spirits. Also, you guys might have heard us mention something about Patreon changing their fee tiers and stuff like that during our last episode. They are not doing that anymore. There was quite a backlash, especially from the podcasting community, and they have resolved to keep it as it is.
Yes.
So if you were a patron and you dropped off because you were worried about the new fees or just you weren't happy with the way that Patreon was handling things, welcome back. Nothing's changing. Join the ranks again.
And we really, truly appreciate your support there. Every dollar that you pledge brings us closer to Akron, Ohio, which is a sentence that I never thought I would say.
Spaghetti gettin'!
Spaghetti gettin', y'all. It can happen as soon as, I don't know, late January, I suppose, with your support on Patreon. So help us get there. Help us get to our goal. Julia just realized in her eyes that she would actually have to go to Ohio when this happens. So
sorry, Eric.
bring us closer to the spaghetti gettin' and pledge at patreon.com/spirits podcast.
And if you're already a patron or you're considering becoming a patron, every episode we rant about something ridiculous and editor Eric has to cut it for time. But if you are a patron at any level, $1 or more, you get to hear us talk about, in this episode, the weird dark timelines of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, every single episode there is some kind of rant that Eric texts us like, why are you saying this as he's editing, and excerpts, a few minutes worth of rant up to, I think, probably 9 is our longest one on record, probably by Gilderoy Lockhart.
The last one was 420 Blaze It.
Blaze It. So we are going to be sharing those with our patrons because, listen, if anyone's going to appreciate my stupid jokes, it's going to be you guys.
That is true.
So without further ado, please enjoy Spirits Podcast episode 56, King Arthur with Christian Madera. We are so pleased this week to welcome Christian Kelly Madera, the co-creator and director of the Once and Future Nerd podcast that we love.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm really excited to geek out with you.
We're excited. We're always excited to geek out. Let's be real here.
Yeah, and I'm particularly pumped that you have brought several pages of typed notes.
Yeah, I was kind of extra with that.
No.
Still got that overachiever.
You can't be too extra. You can't be too extra
with your nerdom.
No, you can't.
Unless you actually, and then we're not okay with that.
Honestly, this entire spiel is like a long actually about
to every single one of our other episodes.
No, just to what everyone thinks about King Arthur.
Listen, we're totally okay with that.
We're here for.
So we're going to talk about King Arthur. And
specifically
kind of how the Arthur myth has evolved over the last 1,500 years. So I kind of wanted to start by asking you guys what you think, just kind of like Family Feud style.
Yeah.
When you hear King Arthur, what do you typically think?
Monty Python, A Quest for the Holy Grail.
Sure.
Yes,
right.
that definitely that was one of the few pop culture references that made it into my childhood.
That's why I had to steal it from you before you could say it.
Thank you. I can recite pretty much the whole thing by memory. I actually have the recording of the movie as an MP3 on my phone.
Great.
Not surprised by
We
that.
had the record as a kid. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And he's played by a blonde kid on TV currently, right?
The show
that's
Merlin? Okay, that's over, but yeah,
Okay,
that is
all
a
right.
thing.
Not so current. Not so current.
Congratulations.
And he had a round table with knights added.
Good job.
That's all I got.
There's a song about it.
Is there a sword in the stone? Was that him?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a lady in a lake.
Yeah.
And there's...
strange women lying in ponds distributing soldiers on basis of a system of government.
Thank you. That was actually fantastic. Good job.
We're going to come back to Monty Python like a couple times.
Powers and
'cause-
mandates
ready
derived
for
from the
it.
masses, not from farcical aquatic ceremony.
God damn.
All right, I'll
Yeah,
stop there.
I can, yeah.
I'm trying to think
we're
if
on the
there's
same
any other
wavelength.
stuff. He gets cheated on by his wife.
Do you remember with whom?
Guinevere, but it's with Lancelot. And then Galahad's hot, I think, maybe?
Yep.
Okay.
Flowing locks of some kind.
Cool.
Dunno.
That's
Yeah.
that's it.
I mean, I think that's generally the bullet points. I've written down my kind of like,
Oh, there's Morgan Le Fay.
There's-
That's a thing, too.
yes, Morgan Le Fay.
There we go.
So,
I got really excited.
like, the point I'm going to drive at this whole time is that there isn't really an Arthur canon, so to speak. There's
Sure.
no one defining Arthur text.
You know we
but-
love multiplicity of myths.
Yeah, but if we were going to do like an electron cloud graph of the key points of Arthur, I'm going to run through those really quick at the top, and then I'll go through how we got there. So,
Nice.
at the beginning, he acquires a sword through some kind of worthiness test. Often the sword is called Excalibur, and often he pulls it out of a stone.
Framing question.
Yes,
Was he a king beforehand, or does finding the sword make him king?
that's the worthiness test that is the sword signifies him as king.
Which
is
makes
usually
I see.
yeah is usually how it goes.
Like Thor's hammer.
Right. Although there are, again, multiplicity of, like, sometimes he was just a random kid who did this and now he's king, or
Right.
he was already the king and he didn't know it, or nobody else knew it and that was how he proved it.
Cool. And finally, what time period are we talking?
Okay, so we're talking about nearly any time in, like, the pre-Renaissance history of England. Arthur first shows up in, like, the 500s or 600s, and that's when he's reported to have lived throughout all the myths, but it gets very, very, very anachronistic as the myth goes on.
As it does. As it does in almost all myth.
Right.
Myths get messy.
Yeah.
I want that as a t-shirt now.
That's good.
As I said it, I was picturing the way
That's
it would
good.
look on a tote bag.
It's like A+ merch. Yeah, so often he pulls the sword out of a stone. Sometimes he's given the sword by the Lady of the Lake. Sometimes both of those things happen and they're different swords. But in any case, there's a worthiness test of some sort that signifies him as the King of Britain. He fights the Saxons and does other grand acts of war. At some point, he assembles his Knights of the Round Table. They are called by God to seek the Holy Grail. In some versions, one of the knights succeeds. It's almost never Arthur.
Sounds about right.
His favorite knight, Lancelot, has an ongoing affair with his queen, Guinevere.
Nice.
At some point...
Why can't it be an OT3, y'all? Why can't it be an OT3?
well,
all about that.
you know, we're going to get to that, actually.
nice.
I feel like Lancelot is a hella gay name, so let's go for it.
It is. At very least, Hellaby.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna get there, because you're not the first to have that thought.
I'm not surprised by that. Knowing the internet, I am not surprised by
Historians are freaky.
that. Historians are freaky.
So, and then at some point, Mordred shows up. Mordred's name means evil counsel in Anglo-Saxon. Often, Mordred is Arthur's illegitimate son via incest with his half-sister, a sorceress, who is usually either Morgan Le Fay or Morgase. Sometimes they're the same character, sometimes they're different characters. And so, as a result, Mordred hates his father, Arthur, and at some point, while Arthur is out of Britain on one quest or another, Mordred usurps the throne and marries Guinevere, either consensually or not, depending on the version of the myth. And so Arthur has to come back to fight Mordred. He usually kills Mordred, but is himself mortally wounded. So he then gets taken to the mythical island of Avalon
Knew that
to
one.
heal his wounds.
So many words that I know are coming together.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So he gets taken to Avalon for his wounds to be treated, never to be seen again. However, there's often a messianic component of this myth where Arthur will one day return to save Britain in some great hour of need.
Sounds like a myth that nationalists can use.
Yes. It also seems like he may have shit the bed during World War II because you think he might have showed up
Yeah.
then.
Maybe that wasn't their greatest time of need.
Maybe.
Brexit is their greatest
Yes.
time of need, and Arthur's just gonna show the fuck up, be like,
Right.
what are y'all doing?
Right.
Or maybe he came briefly to possess the body of the king in Kingsman. What was his name? George? George
the one
the Fourth or something?
Kingsman?
Oh, not King.
the King's Speech?
The King's Speech.
There we
That's the
go.
other Colin Firth movie.
Yeah.
The other, there's more gun shooting in that one,
Yeah.
though.
And a lot more shipping.
Yes.
Anyway, maybe
It's hella
maybe
good,
he
that
came
movie.
briefly
Yeah.
to possess the body of that king
King who
and
had
then
to
he
take
like
over.
noped right out of there.
Yeah.
And oops, sorry, World War II.
Yeah, that's plausible. Although we'll come back to T.H. White, who in a way did want Arthur to show up for World War II.
All
basically.
right.
That sounds right.
Anyway, but so that's kind of the broad strokes of the Arthur, air quotes, canon. But in reality, very, very, very few of those elements were there in the earliest days of the Arthur myth. Most of them were added as the myth evolved over time. And so the point I'm going to drive at, and I'm trying to state this in the most provocative way that I can, is that much of what we think of as the Arthur canon is actually self-insert romantic fanfic.
Yes! My favorite kind!
Spirit's hot take.
Yes, that's my Arthur hot take.
We're all about those angry hot takes where everything is bullshit and we're right.
Yeah, and like
Yeah,
character
that's the best
/ reader
kind.
fanfic, second person fanfic. Not a
Yeah.
fan, but like respect.
Right.
Second person fanfic is perhaps the most ridiculous kind of fanfic. We don't yuck any yums, but
Listen, I've seen it done well like twice, but I do indeed.
compared to how many different second person fanfic there is in the world.
I do have an email filter to block / reader in quotes from my email alerts on the fandoms that I follow.
I'm not surprised by that.
I want to give a quick shout out to the actual Arthurian scholar who goes by Professor Erudite on Tumblr, who
Subscribes immediately.
I pitched them my thesis, and they were like, yeah, that's defensible.
Ooh, we got some academic like citation
Yeah.
and endorsement here.
Yeah, well, I didn't send them the whole thing, but they said that generally the thesis was defensible.
The 2-line thesis that you
Yeah,
said.
the
I hope-
self-insert.
I hope, Professor, if you end up listening to this episode, A, thank you. B, I just hope that we didn't get it too wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's all on me if you did, so that's fine. Okay, so in order to walk us through that, I got to back up and give a partial and sketchy history of the British Isles.
Cool.
Beautiful.
My favorite kind of
Yeah.
history.
It's going to be real broad strokes here. So if we go back like as far as we can reasonably trace, Britain was inhabited by various Celtic tribes. For which, if people don't know, when we say they're Celtic, it's like a family of cultures and languages. They would have seen themselves as distinct tribes from one another who traded and competed or fought over lands and resources. But their languages were all linguistically related, and their religion, mythology, cultural practices would have been recognizable to each other. Like they would have said, "Oh yeah, I know that story," And so in Britain, it was the Britons and the Scots and the Picts, probably a few others that I'm missing. Sorry to all of those people from 5,000 years ago who I'm leaving out. And we should note that for like most of the Bronze Age and going into like the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, Celtic tribes dominated most of Northern Europe. That was just that was their jam. So then we move into the period of Roman Britain, which starting in like the 1st century CE.
That is still fucking crazy to me that people made it from Rome to the UK.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
That's so far.
It's very far.
They built aqueducts and then left.
Yeah, I think
That's all I know about Roman Britain.
I think a lot about how
Build the
far,
aqueducts and leave.
Right. Yes. I think a lot about how far things were when I learned that. Like
That's like never see your family again far.
right. Or also like, yeah, I'm gonna take like in the Viking Age, like, I'm going to take a sailboat across the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
Like, you have to not value your life or be very, very desperate or very, 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 very brave, bordering on psychosis to do that.
Yeah, or
like most Viking people would be like, oh, it's the last one.
Yeah.
Or like
Probably
Pacific Islander and Polynesian peoples. Incredible.
We're in the 1st century CE.
Cool.
And the Roman Empire begins its conquest of Britain. And this involves a lot of events that you've probably tangentially heard of. So they established...
You're giving us a lot of credit.
No.
Well, you're giving Amanda a lot of credit in this situation.
You'll recognize. All right. I'm going to list 3 things, and you'll probably have heard of, like, a few of them.
Yeah.
I was
at 10, what is it? 1055?
66.
1066 was a very important year.
Yeah, Norman conquest.
I'm so sorry, Professor Brown.
So they establish a major trading port on the eastern coast called Londinium, which you might guess becomes modern-day London.
Got that one. Got that one.
We've heard of London. You may have heard of Queen Boudica, who is she's like this badass Celtic warrior queen who
cool.
I've heard of her then.
And the story usually goes that after her husband is killed and her daughter's raped by Romans, she leads a revolt and burns down Londinium.
Yes. Love it.
Yeah, which is a pretty dope thing to do. And you also may have heard of Emperor Hadrian.
Hadrian's Wall.
Yes, he built a wall along the northern border of Roman territory. And we should say that in case any deranged modern-day heads of state happen to be listening, walls are and have always been trash at stopping the movement of people.
That is true.
But they are very good at stopping livestock, so they're effective in a completely agrarian society. Nice. Not so fucking much in 2017.
We can get avocados over walls,
yes,
man.
It's right. It's a very different time than Roman Britain. The Roman conquest of Britain was eventful, but by about like the mid-2nd century CE, it's kind of like an uneasy détente had kind of settled in.
Right.
And
they govern from afar. They do their thing on the Isles.
Exactly.
Pay taxes. Everyone's cool.
Right. That's exactly it. Like, unlike later European models of empire, the Roman Empire didn't feel the need to completely eradicate the cultures of the places they conquered because the economics of the time didn't incentivize it like they did in the Age of Sail. So, not that it was fun to be conquered by Rome, but like basically if you paid your taxes and called Caesar, you were able to do your own thing. So there was like room for genuine cultural sharing relative to other European empires. So while the Romans are in Britain, this kind of distinct, they call it Romano-British culture emerges among the ruling classes, where they basically keep, most of their Celtic languages and religion, but they get aqueducts and bathhouses and better farming technology. So yes,
the good stuff.
Yeah,
it's like a win-win.
Yeah, exactly. Except for any of the peasants who were killed during the military campaign.
To be clear.
Not so great.
Yeah.
Right. But so by the late 300s, the Roman Empire is weakening for lots of factors that you probably learned about at some point in European history class. It's complicated. I still don't remember everything that was going on.
I miss AP Euro.
I do.
So Rome's weakening, and in 410 CE, direct rule of Roman Britain ends, which basically means they just pull their army out. And they're like, hey, you guys good here? All right, bye.
Later.
Got it.
Right. And so it begins the Saxon conquest of Britain. They originated in kind of basically while the Romans were in Britain, the Celtic tribes in Europe were on the decline, and Germanic tribes were on the rise. And they drank mead, they worshipped Odin and Thor, and they were pretty militaristic.
Cool.
All about that.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's mostly tribes called the Angles and the Saxons, hence Anglo-Saxon.
There we go.
Boom.
There's also some Jutes and Frisians in the mix.
Jute just sounds like a racist term you would use for people who live on Jupiter.
Whoa! Wow.
I wanted to turn that around a little bit.
Nice.
Wow.
Nice.
I don't know.
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue a little bit less.
A little too easily.
Anglo-Saxons. Also the name of one of my favorite Mountain Goat songs, the Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah,
it's great.
I don't know that song.
Ooh, I'll play for you later.
Okay. So yeah, Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Frisians. To this day, there's still a language spoken in the Netherlands called Frisian, which is the closest modern language to English. And they're pronounced wildly differently, but you can read a sentence in Frisian and pretty much get it. All right, so these guys come over and they start claiming territory on the British Isles.
Like you do.
So this is about the 400s to 500s. CE. And there's a lot of fighting, but over the next couple centuries, the Saxons, I'll refer to them as the Saxons because that's what the Celts refer to them as.
Right.
It's these 4 tribes, but for ease, we'll call them the Saxons. That's what they're called in the Arthur myths. So they come to dominate what we now think of as England, and which at some point in like the 600s or 700s would have started to be called Angleland because of the Angles, and that's where we get England.
Boom.
So nearly all of the landmass of the like southern and eastern British Isles are now ruled by a Germanic landholding class, and Germanic languages...
I thought you were going to say land holding company.
Yes.
Which is just my finance brain coming out.
Right.
To be like, oh, like what was the LLC under which they structured this, you know?
Right.
Cool.
Right, like Odin LLC.
Like based in the Maldives.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So Germanic languages nearly completely displaced Celtic ones. And to this day, you can maybe correct me on this, having studied Irish.
Very. I must implore you to recognize very briefly.
Okay. To my knowledge, pretty much the only Celtic things that we still have in modern English are the words whiskey, breeches, and like a few grammatical quirks.
Pretty close. There are some food words that are somewhat close, but like, for example, water is the same across lots of Latin language. Water in Irish is ishka, and it's like
Not even
UISCE. Like it's ridiculously different.
Yeah.
But I'm all about whiskey being the same in all languages. I'm so about that.
It's the constant.
It makes my whiskey pong story universal across all languages.
Should you ever hang out with us in person, y'all, buy us a drink after any live show, and Julia will tell you her whiskey pong story.
It is a epic story, very long.
of
mythology
victory
unto
and
itself.
loss and redemption. Yeah, it has a whole narrative arc.
Great.
It ends with me passed down a couch with lo mein next to me.
Good. As all good stories
As it should be.
But so that's why we're drinking mead and whiskey.
Yeah, we are.
Well, there's a reason why you guys are drinking mead and whiskey, and I'm just drinking mead.
Fair.
Julia does not drink brown liquors.
Not anymore.
And then as this conquest is happening, the Celtic rulers who aren't killed or absorbed by Germanic cultures, they retreat to more remote locations on the British Isles. A lot of them go west to Cornwall and Wales and Ireland. Some go north to Scotland, and that is why, in large part, those regions have always had more of a tie to Celtic culture, and why...
And languages.
Yes, and like piggybacking a bit on the decolonial movements of the mid-20th century, we're seeing a revival of Celtic languages in Wales and Ireland and Cornwall, etc. Interestingly, some of the Celtic ruling class flee south, and they sail to France. And that is why there is a region of northwestern France that is still called Brittany. And there they and they still speak a Celtic language there called Breton.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I actually know that. Not that was connected really, but I knew that there was Brittany and it had some sort of British connection.
Amazing.
I'm going to hit you with another fun fact.
Yes, bring it.
It's a little bit antiquated, but that region is sometimes referred to by old-timey Brits as Lesser Britain. And that
Most
is
British thing ever.
But that is why, so like the name Great Britain is not just like colonial self-aggrandizing. Great Britain is also in contrast to Lesser Britain.
Yeah,
The
it's
tiny French
farther
Britain.
north and bigger.
Yes, exactly. And during like the late Middle Ages, there like a lot of British kings like claimed holdings in Brittany and other parts
Yeah.
of
Sounds right.
France. Yeah. So there was an idea that like this is a part of like an incomplete part of Britain.
Amazing. Our sponsor this week is Audible. Audible has an unmatched selection of audiobooks, audio shows, news, comedy, all kinds of stuff, and they're offering Spirits listeners a free 30-day trial and a free book if you sign up at audible.com/spirits.
Now, Amanda, I'm sure you have a book recommendation, but I also have a book recommendation.
Oh, is yours better?
I mean, I'm not going to say it's better, but The Last Jedi did come out this week.
It did.
And Audible has an amazing audiobook that's celebrating the 40th anniversary of Star Wars that came out in October called From a Certain Point of View. And it is amazing.
Have you read it?
I've read the short story, and like listening to the audiobook is 1,000 times better because they have a full cast reading all these short stories. Neil Patrick Harris is in it. John Hamm is in it for some
my
reason.
gosh.
It is worth checking out.
Yeah, and our I'm not going to say our friend because one would aspire to that, but Griffin McElroy, noted podcasting king and 30 Under 30 media luminary, along with our
good friend Griffin McElroy.
along with our actual friend Lauren Shippen. Anyway, but he contributed a story to the book, so I'm really excited to hear that story come to life.
Hey, also former guest on Spirits podcast, Greg Rucka, also wrote a short story for that. Hey, Greg Rucka.
Greg Rucka.
What's
We
up,
love
buddy?
him from our Wonder Woman episode. I love that idea, and I think I'm going to use my free trial to listen to that book. But the one that I have to recommend is Vacation Land by John Hodgman.
Is it also read by John Hodgman?
It is read by John Hodgman.
Excellent.
Which just, I mean, I enjoyed hearing his voice in my head as I read the physical copy of the book, but then I switched kind of halfway through to listen to the audiobook. And it is really, really nice to hear him speak in like emotion. He's very kind of deadpan as a comic, but to hear him talk about the really like gorgeous prose and sardonic, really good humor that he has to offer in Vacation Land, which is a kind of memoir essay book about Maine, where his wife's family has vacation for a long time, and now he does as well. And it's just a wonderful book. It has a lot to do with like parenting and fatherhood, obviously neither of which I really understand, but it made me feel as if I did. So I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I also read the book. I haven't listened to the audiobook yet. Maybe that'll be what I use my free trial for.
Oh, adorable.
But
it's like when couples put their arms around each other at the wedding to eat the cake.
Okay.
Only books.
Okay, that's cool. So check out Audible. You can go to audible.com/spirits to get a 30-day free trial and a free book.
Enjoy, and thank you so much to Audible for sponsoring the show. Now, let's get back to King Arthur.
Cool. So then with that little mini Celtic diaspora that happened in mind, we can put the Arthur myth in context.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it up.
Cool. So, unfortunately, the oldest surviving written text that we have about Arthur is Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae. My Latin is terrible. I'm sorry.
This is going to be really weird, but I've heard of this before.
Yeah, it's like a big
I
deal.
read selections in my British history class.
Yeah, it's like the first attempt. So in Latin, it means history of the kings of Britain, and it's an attempt to like tell the story of all the kings of Britain up until the time that Geoffrey of Monmouth was writing, going back centuries. We consider it today a pseudo-historical account because it's like very clear that some of the stories are fanciful, and it's like it's in that phase of writing history where mythology and folklore were mixed with verifiable fact very interchangeably and without distinction.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. Little side story, Geoffrey of Monmouth was a Welsh monk, but I think for fun, let's just imagine he's a guy named Jeff from Monmouth County, New Jersey.
Great. Love it.
Yeah. So,
Also a monk, but like on
also
holiday.
a monk. Yeah, so is he from
Monmouth, what?
Yeah, exactly. Is he from like Freehold or Asbury Park or Red Hook? Where should we decide Jeff is from?
We're from Long Island, so we know nothing about New Jersey.
Okay,
It's like contractual.
I'm also from Long Island, but I've had because I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan, so I've had to learn the geography.
Yeah.
enough.
So I'm going to say he's from Freehold.
Let's do it.
Cool. Okay, so the history of the kings of Britain is completed around 1138, which means we're way past the Saxon conquest. And
We
we're
super are.
Yeah, and we're already a couple decades into the Norman conquest, which is 1066.
1066. That's all I gotta know.
Right. But it cites earlier written histories that we have lost, and it also cites oral traditions going back to the 500s and 600s.
So Jeff from Freehold did a good job.
He was pretty thorough as far as you could
He
be.
listened to his Nana stories. What?
Exactly.
But he didn't save her like baby books that had all the dates and years in
Nah,
them.
fuck that.
That's exactly right. So he definitely added some of his own imaginings into the stories because there's stuff that never appears in an earlier text. So we can safely say that if it's not in Geoffrey of Monmouth's account, that it probably wasn't a prominent feature of the Arthur myth before like 1100.
Nice to have that like watershed text.
Yeah. So what's actually included in Geoffrey of Monmouth's story of King Arthur? Because Arthur is one of the kings that shows up in his History of the Kings of Britain.
You would hope so.
In Jersey Jeff's account,
I can't get over that image now.
I love it. Just like spiky hair. Yeah.
So dumb.
So awesome.
so he succeeds his
Devil's
father.
jersey.
What's that?
A devil's jersey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So he succeeds his father Uther Pendragon as the king of Britain. Jeff mentions his sword Excalibur and his magician advisor Merlin, so they show up in this
Nice.
account.
Hell yeah.
Nice.
And in this account, Arthur is a Romano-British king, and he's a pretty straightforward, like, warrior hero. He fights bears and witches and other threats to Britain, like you do.
Bears and witches.
Yeah, those are the main. Those are the main threats.
He fought bears and witches and shit. What?
Yeah, right. Do you even fight bears, bro? He also leads raids against fairy castles to liberate human prisoners there. That's like a very
That they ate some food and now they're stuck in the fairy castle.
Exactly. It's a
classic.
Like you
never eat the food, people.
in
Come
the fairy
on.
realm. You don't, right? But like that's a very Celtic warrior hero thing to do. And yes, he fights the Saxons so successfully that they are not a threat again until after his death. So this is a major part of the Welsh, that is, Celtic tradition surrounding Arthur, was that he was this great hero who stood against the Saxon invasion to preserve the Celtic identity of the British Isles.
Cool.
That was like his main jam, we can say, prior to like Geoffrey of Monmouth and earlier. So like, which is not really recognizable. Like Arthur as a warrior king is not really what you think of.
So this is sort of the original version off which all the future permutations like leapt.
That's exactly right. And then so after he repels the Saxons and unifies England, that's important as it like cements Arthur as part of the British national creation myth that he unified the Isles. Then he goes to build his own empire by establishing claims in Ireland, Iceland, Norway, and Denmark. That probably didn't happen because we probably would have heard about it in the Norse sagas at some point if that happened.
The Norse were like sitting in full libraries looking at England as they like told stories over campfires being like, what are you, do you guys even history?
Yeah, exactly.
Arthur fictionally got around.
Yes.
He did.
Yes. And he eventually challenges the Emperor of Rome. Like, he moves so far south that, like, Rome starts to get threatened.
That's bold, my friend.
Exactly.
Naturally.
He's a badass in this earliest version of the myth.
Hell yeah.
But while he's fighting Rome, he learns that Mordred, who in this text is just his nephew, like, there's no weird incest in there's no, like, sorcerer incest or anything like that. It's just his nephew, who's kind of a dick. His nephew has married Guinevere and claimed his throne, so he goes back, kills Mordred, is mortally wounded, and taken to Avalon. So that part is all there.
All right.
So our buddy Jeff is like very influential in England and also in spreading Arthur like back across the continent. But he's not the only source in the continent because remember that the Celtic tribes fleeing the Saxons settled in Brittany/Lesser Britain in like the 500s or 600s, and they brought with them this story of this great warrior king who would one day return and restore, Britain to them. Like they were a diaspora culture, and they thought they were going to get their homeland back when Arthur returned.
Some Targaryen shit going on right now. Cool.
Exactly. So French monks, they're reading Geoffrey of Monmouth.
They're making some dope-ass cheese.
Yes, they're making some dope cheese. And they're hearing from the Breton people also about this. They've been hearing about Arthur for a while, just not
like,
in
we
as...
get it, you're going to leave soon, yep.
Right. And it's in France in like the 12 to 1300s that the Arthur story becomes recognizable to what we have today.
That's so amazing, especially because like those are the people who needed that myth the most.
Right.
Yeah.
So here are the major changes that like the French monks introduce.
Okay.
They begin to focus on the Knights of the Round Table.
Cool.
Who weren't really a big part of Arthur before.
No, but the world building.
Yes, the world building.
The original author didn't get it, so the fans are world building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they had the Knights of the Round Table, especially Lancelot and his doomed romance with Guinevere, Arthur's queen. We should notice that if we stare at the name Lancelot for a few seconds...
Means he fucks a lot. I'm sorry.
I wasn't going there, but yes, maybe. No, probably not. But yeah, sure. Good. Right, but no, if we stare at Lancelot's name long enough, we realize it looks like a pretty French name.
It does.
It does.
And Lancelot is canonically French. He usually comes from Lesser Britain, who when Arthur puts out a call to all the knights in Lesser Britain to help him repel the Saxons, Lancelot shows up.
He takes a boat and shows up.
Yep. And also the Grail quest gets centered.
Yep.
Because these are very, very, very Catholic monks adding on to a very, very, very not Catholic story.
Gotta just throw the grail in there. Just put a little god in the cracks.
Exactly. And Arthur is almost never the one to get the grail, if anyone gets the grail. It's usually one of his knights. Sometimes it's Galahad. Sometimes it's Lancelot. But so to tell these stories, which is what the French were really interested in telling, Arthur has to get sidelined because they are focused on the stuff that's not Arthur. And in order to like spend time on the Lancelot Guinevere affair, and for that to make sense, Arthur either has to be absent, oblivious, or a weak and ineffectual cuckold.
Which that's not going to happen in a myth about a warrior king world builder.
But it does.
Unless you are a French monk talking about it. Who doesn't
Exactly.
give a shit about this cool Celtic dude.
And that's
Because it's not your dude. Like,
it's
why,
not your
why does it
dude.
matter? Oh.
So exactly. So to recap, once French monks get their hands on Arthur, the story becomes about a French guy who just so happens to be like so suave and good at being a knight. Like he's just so good at being a knight, you guys.
That's so weird. I would have never put those two things together.
Wild, right? He's so good at being a knight that the queen just falls in love with him, you know, like
can't
you
help
do.
it.
Right. And also, him and his friends are so awesome and virtuous that one of them becomes besties with like actual Jesus Christ. So
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. That's
right.
accurate.
right. So that, my friends, is a self-insert love triangle romantic fanfic.
Yes.
If I have ever heard one. And honestly, like I've been trying to figure out exactly what the modern equivalent of this reframing would be, and the best I would come up with is like if the next Die Hard movie was written entirely in a Tumblr thread and John McClane is in like 3 scenes and the rest of the movie is Oscar Isaac seducing his wife. Like that's pretty much if that was the next Die Hard movie.
I'm pretty sure someone on Tumblr has written that already.
Right in,
close.
because I'm sure you have. So.
Someone find this for me, because I would watch a movie where with Oscar Isaac, like really honestly just wooing anyone.
Yeah, like to be clear, we would all watch that movie.
The thing
but
Hollywood hasn't figured out is that fans are multitudinous and have a shitload of money and like to see things more than once.
Yes.
yes. Okay, and so I should also note that during this time of like the French monks redoing Arthur,
Sure.
we also add the element where Mordred is the illegitimate son of Arthur through incest with his half-sister, the sorceress Morgase or Morgan Le Fay. In most versions, she uses some kind of magic to conceal her identity and or seduce him, because this is now a very, very Catholic story. So
How he couldn't have had deviant desires in his heart when this happened.
Right, and we also need to associate pagan magic with femininity
Of course.
in general and feminine sexuality in particular,
Yes.
and wrap the whole thing up in one bundle of evil and treachery. Yeah.
Which, like, awesome conclusion. We love it.
Yeah, right. So now we're gonna hop back across the channel to England, and we're gonna come to Thomas Malory.
Goodbye, Little Britain. I can hardly see you from here.
Exactly. And he publishes Le Mort d'Arthur. My French is bad.
The Death of Arthur.
Yes.
I can translate that.
Right on. So he publishes that in 1485, and it's his attempt to compile all of the French and English stories about Arthur into his squad into one like coherent narrative.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Thomas Malory. Sir Malory tends to be the jumping off point or skeleton for nearly all of the later English language retellings of Arthur. So if there's anything that resembles a canon
This is it.
for Arthur, it's Malory. But we should bear in mind that it's very, very, very French influence. Like the fact that it has a French title even when published in England, and this is after French was like in style as the court language in England. So that's very telling. And one could, and I am arguing that by this point, the Arthur canon is as much French as it is English.
Checks out.
Yes. And this is like a big thing in the Arthur scholarship, air quotes, that arguably the central national myth of Britain is like actually really French.
Which, like, that's so fitting because so much about British identity
Stolen.
is like crafted and retold in opposition to France or in
Yes,
the context of France. All of English history is just a chronicle of its relationship with France.
Fuck you,
at the end of
France.
the
Is
day.
basically
Yeah,
the the point
And
of
so
that
much
is.
like English national identity and points of pride, especially English, but kind of British more broadly, are again in opposition to France or perceived notions of France or to like Europe as a continent, which is
Right.
refracted through France.
Right.
So that makes so much sense, and I love it.
Right. And it's also interesting how much of the modern English language is very, very, very French.
Oh yeah.
And so, yeah, exactly. And like allegedly, one of Tolkien's reasons for writing Lord of the Rings was he wanted to create a British origin myth that was actually British in origin because he knew how French Arthur was. And I think that Monty Python were well read enough and like studied enough to know about this undercurrent in the in the
those are
scholarship.
Oxbridge bros. They
Yeah.
knew what they were doing.
So when Graham Chapman as Arthur asks the French knights, well, what are you doing in England? He never gets an answer. He never gets a good answer. They're just like, oh yeah, there's just these French guys in England and we're not, there's all this
we have
French
a castle.
stuff.
They're
Exactly.
like, why?
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly. And I think they were smart enough to like be doing that on purpose. One last cool detail from Malory. It includes the detail that Arthur's tomb in Avalon bears the inscription, and here I go with bad Latin, hic jacet Arturus rex quondam rexque futurus. Again, excuse me.
Wait, I know what this is.
Yes, it's here lies Arthur, king once and king who will be.
The once and future king.
Once and future king.
Yes.
And that's where T.H. White gets the name for his book, and we're going to come back to White.
And where you got your podcasting for.
Yes, though it is not, I should say it's not like explicitly
Right.
Arthurian, though there's you can't do fantasy without having
You can't.
some Arthurian
Yeah.
undercurrents.
And once again, is Avalon real?
Probably not. I mean, it might be some tiny island that we've lost track of, but it seems like a mythical place, almost
Like
along
a healing place, or like a final retreat type place?
depending on some versions of the myth, it has like connections to the fairy world. It is like they think that maybe linguistically it's related to a Celtic word for apple. Like there's something.
I was gonna say like it sounds like it might have
the
like
garden
Garden of
type thing,
Eden,
right.
kind
Yeah,
of
it's got this feeling of like an unspoiled connection, and I'm like,
Yeah.
Everything is Eden. Yeah.
yeah, and to a not sinister version of the fairy world that is a place of healing.
Cool. Thank you.
My aunt's country club was named Avalon.
It's a very like popular
yeah.
like estate slash
yeah.
because that's the idea, right? You go there and you heal, and then maybe you come back and save Britain. Okay, so Malory's 1485. But then as we like leave the Middle Ages and enter the Renaissance, interest in medieval romances starts to kind of fade. But then it comes back in the 19th century, where there's like a romantic movement in the arts, and also with the rise of nationalism, people are interested in their national origin myths.
Also novels.
Yes.
They were some dirty, dirty Victorian boys and girls, not
Yes.
girls.
Yes. And everybody was terrified by novels and bicycles, that everyone was going to be lesbians because of novels and bicycles.
I'm all about the bicycle
checks
lesbians.
out.
Yeah.
Checks out.
And so obviously the nationalism gets very ugly in a lot of places. Wagner was a real nasty guy. And loved his Germanic mythology. But anyway, in 1816, we see the first new edition of Malory since 1634. So that's telling. And then after World War I, there's a bit of a dip again as Europeans briefly sour on the idea of like martial chivalry and nationalism, because like, well, that ended in a nasty place.
Yeah, not the
Just for a
best.
second, though, before they forgot.
Yeah,
And
yes,
then we came back to it real quick.
real hard.
With a vengeance.
But so T.H. White uses that souring on those ideas as his advantage, to his advantage. So the Once and Future King is a tetralogy. The last volume is not published until 58, but the first three come out in 38, 39, and 40, respectively.
What a time.
So T.H. White takes Malory as the basic skeleton for his version, but in his, Arthur's primary concern is uniting Britain under a just rule of law. Which
Sounds like super post World War I.
yes, and also that White paints it as in stark contrast to the Saxon. Remember the Germanic Saxon ethos that he presents as like might makes right. So we're 38 to 40.
That sounds like Germany.
Yes, we're 38 to 40. It's
Yeah.
very easy to see what White is getting at. So his Arthur is an explicitly anti-fascist Arthur, which is kind of cool.
This is why historical criticism is the shit.
His Arthur is literally just Churchill, I'm imagining.
In some ways,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's almost like his Merlin is more, I don't know, but yes, yeah, it's something like that.
Someone is Churchill in this
Yeah.
situation.
I'm sure someone has written that essay.
Yeah. And he tries, in White's defense, he tries not to be a hypocrite about it. There's this really weird undertone in White where, like, the Irish just need to get over it.
Oh.
It's odd, and you'd be tempted. Yeah.
Amanda's face is like,
Yeah, it's very odd, and like you would
Yeah.
be tempted to just write it off as like old British guy, but he does go out of his way to have Merlin remark very anachronistically about how like the Boer War was unjustified imperial aggression on the part of England.
Old English Jews love talking about the Boer War.
they do indeed.
But he's like, oh, that was super bad, but like the Irish should just like get over it.
Irish are just,
It's weird. It's an odd thing, but like he tries to have like an ideologically
Yeah.
consistent position
Yeah.
that might makes right is wrong.
I'm also flashing to like the kind of like queer, like anti-gay, like, oh, you just gotta get over it, but it's face.
just live your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're about to come back to that in a very big way in like 3 seconds. So this is the 20th century now, right? So we're post-Freud, we're post-Ibsen, we're post-Chekhov.
You always want to be post-Freud.
Yeah. Yes. Thank God. But so audiences are like very interested in psychological motivation now and characters that were like psychologically coherent individuals. And it's
With motivations, right?
Yes.
And like and like consistent actions.
Right. And it's sorry, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, I was just in my head finishing your sentence. You're like, audience was very into gay things. Super into the gay stuff, right?
Hang on, we're so close.
I know, I know,
We're so
I'm sorry.
close.
So close, so
We're
close.
so
You said
close.
3 seconds, and my mind was like, 1,
Sorry.
2,
No,
3,
sorry.
go.
All right. It's more like, all right, so like 120 seconds, something like that.
Gotcha.
So it's like, it's considered a plus at this time in literature if characters are acting on motivations that they aren't consciously aware of.
Yes.
Right?
Hella Freud.
And medieval literature, not. They're like valued very different things and doesn't hold up to the, like, I can come back someday and we can do Beowulf and how it's just like fucking bonkos
Yep.
from a modern.
Yeah.
Hell
Like
yeah.
people are acting on things like, what? Why?
Yeah, and Chaucer.
Yeah, exactly. Why did you do that?
Doesn't matter.
Right.
Also, the way that Julia helped me enjoy Star Wars for the first time was just like, these are not people, these are archetypes. And
Yes.
like, we are going to watch an opera and not a movie. And I was like, okay, good,
Yeah,
I got it.
It is an opera. Yeah, that's
It is.
good. That's good.
Thank you.
I
I did my best.
Julia knows how to make me like things.
Yes.
That's really good. I have to use that.
I sat her down. I'm like, we're going to watch a children's show, but it's about gay aliens and gender role. And Amanda's like, okay, I will watch this now.
Yeah.
So that was Steven Universe, by the way.
Cool.
Yeah.
So T.H. White looks back at the Malory skeleton through this modern psychologically motivated lens. He realizes that a lot of Lancelot's behavior only makes sense if Lancelot is in romantic love with Arthur.
Woo!
That's
Do a
like
little dance here.
Finally, someone's looking out for Amanda.
exactly. And it
Everything's
is
coming up, Amanda.
it is never like explicitly stated in the text, but like all but like it is.
Yeah, yeah.
The subtext is very, very, very strong.
The subtext is basically, he wants to kiss him on the mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's very like, and he admired him as a boy and was like, and like, there's lots of stuff about how like Lancelot never feels like he fit in his society and like,
That'll do it.
and like feeling like he's made wrong and all this stuff. But he's
Yeah.
like
My friend.
his admiration for Arthur is so intense that he sometimes like
And
feels
intensity
floored.
of feeling and closeness that he desired.
Weird.
Man,
Yeah.
the first time that someone like told me that or that I read that online, I was like, oh, that explains so much.
Right, every novel is gay now.
Right, not only interpreting novels and movies, but also like my own like queer childhood where like I didn't have vocabulary or like knowledge or the opportunity. No one like asked me to consider those things.
Right.
And so it was only like in retrospect at 14, 15, 16, like reading this kind of like criticism and realizing from, the internet and fandom that, oh, everything can be gay. I'm like, oh no, that was
It
why.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's like very, very strong in
Yes.
Once and Future King. And most of T.H. White's biographers tend to agree that White was probably gay himself. He never came out, and he came close to marrying several women. We should
Haven't
note,
we all? Haven't we all?
yeah, right. And we should note that being gay was illegal in the UK until 1967, and T.H. White died from heart failure in 1964, because this portion of the show is going to be a real fucking bummer, by the way.
This is sad.
Yeah. And also, coming back to Monty Python, I do think they were also well-read enough to be aware of this idea, because it's a major part of Spamalot that Lancelot
There is
is
a
gay.
5-minute song about how Lancelot is hella gay.
Yeah, but even in Holy Grail, there's one of the best like throwaway jokes that you will miss if your TV isn't turned up loud enough. Where like I think like when Galahad when Lancelot rescues Galahad from Castle Anthrax
with all the priestesses, the nuns or whatever,
the spanking and the oral sex,
spanking and the oral sex.
Yeah, and and he's like, "Can I have a little bit of peril?" No, it's too perilous. I'm like, just as they're about to go recede into the distance and cut away, Galahad's like, "Bet you're gay." I'm not.
I'm not. And then it just cut away.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. And so then there is one last modern Arthur story that we really should mention after White, and that is The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, published in 1983.
Not the Merlin series by BBC. No kidding.
No, we're gonna do Mists of Avalon. Mists of Avalon. Okay, so it's written from the point of view of the major women in the Arthur story. So we get a lot of Morgan Le Fay and who in most previous versions tended to be either villains or have very, very, very little agency. In the case of like Guinevere,
Like you do.
yeah. And it's like very explicitly a mission of Mists of Avalon to undo that conflation from the Catholic monks of pagan magic with feminine sexuality and feminine sexuality with evil.
Good.
So in Mists of Avalon, it basically presents a pagan matriarchy, partially imagined, partially...
Julia's like, hold on.
Yes.
I just go, yes, please, continue
exactly.
on.
And it's a partially imagined version, like a lot of modern paganism, and it's also partially based in real Celtic history, but it presents this as a preferable alternative to the Christian patriarchy that England ended up with in Bradley's view. I imagine your listenership will find some sympathy with that idea.
Yeah, the word preferable does tend to stick out in that sentence.
Yes, exactly. And it's a very cool project in that way of her trying to kind of take back the Arthur canon for the women in it and for women in the modern world. And her Arthur has a foot in kind of both the Celtic pagan matriarchy and the Christian patriarchy, right? Yeah. And it views like the battle for Arthur's worldview among the women in the book becomes kind of a proxy for the battle of the soul of Britain.
Yeah,
Cool.
I should note that T.H. White's gay Lancelot subtext is very much text in this version. Spoiler, there is a threesome.
Woo!
And I want to Amazon order this book right now.
Before you do. There is a lot to love in this book. I personally consider it a masterpiece, but back to being a fucking bummer. It is not uncomplicated. There's a lot of effort devoted to giving sexual agency to very young women in the story, like 13 to 15, which...
Not great.
Yeah, but like...
But if the motivation was right,
Right.
I see how it can be great territory.
Right, and you would argue that women married and got pregnant at that time in, Arthur
Historically,
era.
right.
Right, so it seems... valuable and cool and feminist in a way to like at least know what they were thinking about their own sexuality since they were having sex.
And like that's all of YA novels, right? Is like acknowledging and kind of working through teenage sexuality, though in the context of with other teenagers.
Right, exactly.
Not adult men that were forced to marry them.
Yes, but like presumably these women like had thoughts about that.
Of
like,
course,
I have to go have sex with this 40-year-old now. Like I'm gonna have a thought about it, and it's interesting.
Right, like deal with that and reconcile that.
Right. And so that's what I thought reading it the first time through, that this was like a cool feature of the book. Did not learn until well into reading the book. Marion Zimmer Bradley almost definitely aided and abetted her husband, who was a serial sexual abuser of children.
Oh, God!
And was also probably a sexual abuser herself. Victims included her own...
And cancel that Amazon order.
Yeah. They included...
Reason, other sexual sadism.
Yeah. And she very probably abused her own son and daughter. So
Jesus fuck.
yeah,
That's
so
not great.
It's not ideal. So seen in that light, it feels a little more sinister to ascribe this sexual agency to these
Out
young...
of context, good. In context, not great.
Biographical criticism can put a real downer on things.
Yes. As a caveat, I would say if people can't bring themselves to read the book because of that, I get it. That said, Bradley's daughter inherited her estate, and all the profits from book sales go to RAIN or to other charities for children.
Good.
All right.
And
All right.
reordering.
Nice.
Right. So for me, and
Undo cancellation.
right. So for me, anyway, like it was kind of important. I think it was really good to read a book and realize that someone can have really smart, important ideas and still be a monster.
Things that are both.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Our favorite phrase. Things
Yep.
that are both.
Things that are both.
Yeah.
You can, those two things can exist at the same time.
Yeah.
And our brains have to figure out a way to hold them both.
Exactly. And so I do highly recommend Mists of Avalon, but also keep that in the back of your mind.
But more broadly, the project of like imagining yourself in a history that has had no place for you heretofore is like one of the most important projects that a person can do. Like, thinking through queer people in history, or seeing women of color, or seeing like women in historical situations that their stories have not been recorded, is like so fundamental and soul affirming in a way that critics of like quote unquote like diversity or pander or like what checking boxes like whatever kind of criticism people level against like us being excited to see Star Wars with leads of color and gay characters and women protagonists, like it just, I don't think you can, like, I have had trouble articulating how like fundamentally and animalistically affirming it is to see
Right.
and to look for, and if you can't find it, to create versions of yourself in media that you love, which is why like I will always and forever be a supporter of fandom, because that is a way to put your narratives into legitimate quote unquote source material that hasn't been created for you, like to just make it happen for yourself and for others.
That's like our good friend Misha Stan said
Yep.
At the beginning of the year. As long as you're going to be part of the matriarchy, be part of the matriarchy. And I
Yeah.
love that. If you don't find something that fits your area, that fits your representation, make it yourself.
For sure.
And, we're trying to do that as best we can. And I think that by telling these stories and telling them through a different lens than they've historically been told, we're achieving that end. And I'm super stoked
like,
about that.
Even if and when like mishearing something that you are saying gives us a new foothold into a myth, like that is legitimate too.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a way to, again, like put a a personal spin on a story, or to revive history and to make stories relevant to yourself, to find a way to connect with a past, to think about these complex issues, like to reconcile with stuff that you're otherwise not invited to participate in. I think however you get in the door, by hook or by crook, like, you should be there.
Good phrase.
Yeah. And that was basically the conclusion I wrote just said so much better by
You're welcome
people
to talk
who are
to.
not straight white men.
You are on our platform and you are welcome.
No, it's very true. And like I think there's I'm not gonna even attempt to get the quote exactly right, but like Junot Diaz talks about this quote about like vampires, like a vampire is a monster that doesn't have a reflection. And so he talks about like as a Latino kid growing up and like not seeing himself in any of the fiction, like you feel like a monster when you don't have a reflection.
Word.
And so that's
Also set of New Jersey. Diaz.
And that's why I think Mists of Avalon is really important, despite the biographical problems with it, and that's why Arthur has survived for 1,500 years,
because we keep adapting that story to make it fit our timeline.
Exactly. He's he gets to be whatever the author wants to say is special and good about Britain, like whatever they happen to think,
and whatever they need it to be.
Exactly. To paraphrase Christopher Nolan, he's whatever Britain needs him to be. Because that's the Arthur.
Have to be the hero that Gotham deserves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. And like so, before anyone shits on fic writers, like Arthurian Canon is a self-insert love triangle fan fiction.
As
A+.
a former fic writer and as Amanda is a current fic writer, we are totally into that.
We are so here for it. Oh, so good. So good.
Yeah.
Man. Well, thank you so much. You want to plug your stuff?
Yeah, and it actually, that's kind of, I do my best. That's kind of what we try to do with the Once and Future Nerd. For anyone who's not familiar, it's a fantasy audio drama, and we take 3 high school kids from modern day Pennsylvania and put them in a kind of Game of Thrones type high fantasy world. And we've always tried to be kind of like what Cabin in the Woods was for horror, for fantasy, where it's like a humorous comment on the genre within a hopefully successful instance of the genre, but a big part of the criticism that we level is like whose stories aren't getting told in quote unquote traditional fantasy, which is very much just reshuffling the mythology of Northern Europe.
Yeah, dudes conquering stuff.
Yeah. And over time, there's been a lot of like the ways that, indigeneity and racial otherness have gotten baked into the genre in really problematic ways. So we talk about the way that, indigenous storytelling is erased by our shared cultural mythology. And, there are...
and like elves are the most Aryan,
Yes.
and other races who are
Elves
meant
are
out
just
to
so
be
white.
Yeah.
and other races who are meant to be like enemies of like the quote unquote heroes are
Orcs.
coded in ways that are
Exactly.
Racially other and
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've got one of the three kids from Pennsylvania who end up in our world. One of them is a young white man who's got an alcoholic father, put a lot of toxic masculinity on him. One of them is a black nerd whose parents were academics and and so he's got some of that background, even if he's had to hide it for years in his rural town. And one of them is a woman who was sexually abused when she was younger. And so all of them are bringing their lens onto this fantasy world where all those things are happening. It's not explicitly Arthurian. We do have a knight who's very, 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 very much in love with the king he served.
Sweet.
Yeah. So we do try to do that kind of reimagining of myth and trying to, the best we can, put people into it who would have been excluded before.
you're doing good work. And
Thank you.
Isn't that like the beautiful burden of being alive is like working through your shit alongside other people?
Yeah.
I hope.
That's true.
You can find Once and Future Nerd on iTunes or just Google it. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr, and we have a subreddit. So pretty much any of the places that you go to find or talk about podcasts will be there.
Go leave them a nice
Awesome.
review.
Check them out. Say some nice words. Check out their episodes. And remember, listeners,
Stay creepy.
stay cool. Spirits was created by Amanda McLaughlin, Julia Schaffini, and Eric Schneider, with music by Kevin MacLeod and visual design by Allison Wakeman.
Keep up with all things creepy and cool by following us on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and Instagram @Spirits Podcast. We also have all our episodes, collaborations, and guest appearances, plus merch on our website, spiritspodcast.com.
Come on over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/spiritspodcast, for all kinds of behind-the-scenes stuff. Throw us as little as $1 and get access to audio extras, recipe cards, director's commentaries, and patron-only live streams.
And hey, if you like the show, please share us with your friends. That is the best way to help us keep on growing.
Thank you so much for listening. Till next time.